fortunate to welcome a panel of 4 distinguished guests. They are Mr. Takeshi Soda-san, Director, Petroleum and Natural Gas Division, Natural Resources and Field Department, Agency for Natural Resources and Energy, Japan. Ms. Liao Lei Mei, Director, Energy Division, Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore. Ms. Sumiko Takeuchi-san, Member, Board of Directors, International Environment and Economy Institute. And finally, Ms. Lede Krumina, Market Development Manager, Renewable Road Transportation, Europe and Asia Pacific, Neste. We are also fortunate to have with us Mr. Satya Ramamurthy, our moderator for the session today. He is the Global Co-Head of Public Transport, KPMG, and a good friend and council member of the SIIA. Some simple housekeeping rules. Each speaker will have about 5 minutes to present their perspectives on the issue. Following that, we will have the opportunity for a Q&A session. If you wish to share your questions or views, please submit them via the Q&A function in the Zoom app located at the bottom of your screen. Okay, without further ado, allow me to introduce Mr. Satya Ramamurthy to begin the session. Satya, please.
Thank you, Chun Leng. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone who has joined this webinar. We're really delighted that you're going to be listening intently to some very, very thoughtful and experienced speakers. As the topic suggests, we're talking about geopolitical volatility and climate change, implications for energy and innovation in ASEAN and Asia. And what the speakers are really going to be able to contribute to this session is provide a quick overview of really what's going to happen, what's happening in Japan and Singapore, and how this can help promote better climate cooperation in the region. We're also hoping that the role of businesses and other stakeholders that can be played in this transition will be covered. And finally, of course, the elephant in the room is really the impact of the crisis from Russia and Ukraine, which has disrupted the energy complex, not just in Europe, but also in this part of the world. I was reading an article in the Economist in 2020, which talked about how the new energy technologies and renewable energy is going to change the geopolitics of energy itself. And as we all know, the renewable energy is meant to democratize and make the world much less power-centered, to use a pun, but rather much more broad-based. What COVID promised to usher, at least at the start, was an era where we would see considerable shift into renewable energies, focus on improving efficiencies, and being, highly conscious of consumption. And within 1 year of COVID, I think everybody forgot what actually happened. Of course, we had the supply chain bottlenecks. Of course, we've had the war. But everybody seems to have pretty much, gone back on all of those wonderful ideas that were spoken about at the start of COVID. We are still, 85% fossil fuel driven globally. Increasingly, we are seeing re-emergence of coal as a safety fuel, so to speak. And so one of the things I would see will be very interesting is what is the level of commitment, particularly in Japan and in Singapore and the rest of Asia, on continuing to invest in innovation to drive what we all know is an imperative, because the commitments being made mid-century have not gone away. They're still very much there, and they're on the table. Now, what I would like to do is now hand over to Mr. Takeshi Soda to really talk about his perspectives, from the Japan's end, and also how he's seeing these developments contributing to ASEAN's development in transitioning to new energies. Soda-san.
Thank you, Satya. This is Takeshi Soda. I'm a director of Oil and Gas Division of METI. And then thank you for inviting me this SIB webinar with distinguished panels. And I'm really happy to share our views of the current situation. And I'd like to introduce the Japan's initiatives of the Asia Energy Transition Initiatives, which was announced last year. And also, I would like to touch upon the possibility of the collaboration with Singapore in this area. So I'm going to start my opening speech. So after the Ukraine crisis, geopolitical volatility has been increasing, and we are now in a situation where we cannot talk about climate change solutions without considering energy security. Not to mention, we must aim for carbon neutrality at all costs. However, we have to have a down-to-earth discussion on how to achieve carbon neutrality while ensuring improved energy access, economic growth, and stable energy supply. Amidst this energy crisis, developed countries, especially European countries, are now learning to procure their LNG, which have made LNG prices skyrocketed. Due to this extremely expensive price of LNG, Asian countries are now unable to purchase necessary amount of LNG, which has made electricity and gas unavailable for their people. And there are even fears of political instability. These situations should have become away from our common goal, that is, to achieve a just transition where no one is left behind. I want to explain about the kind of movement up to COP26. We believe that Japan can share our concern with Asia, especially with ASEAN countries. We have doing our best to introduce renewable energy. In fact, Japan has the world's largest solar PV installed capacity per land area. However, I don't have to reiterate that it is impossible to achieve carbon neutrality by introducing 100% renewable energy because Asia, including Japan, is still highly dependent on fossil fuels, and wind and solar power are unevenly distributed compared to Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Unfortunately, until last year, and especially until COP26 in last November, the discussion was all about achieving carbon neutrality and 100% renewable energy, as if they could achieve easily. The Minister of Climate Change of one country publicly stated that Asia could achieve carbon neutrality in 2050 by introducing 100% renewable energy. IEA also announced a 2050 net zero scenario for the entire world, and at the G7 meeting in June 2021, achieving net zero by 2050 was set as a goal which the world should strive for. I heard that environmental NGOs in Asian countries were also pressing their governments to declare the target year when they would achieve carbon neutral. Amid such domestic and international pressure to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, Japanese government held the ASEAN-Japan Energy Minister meeting in June last year and strongly declared that a realistic energy transition that achieves both economic growth and climate action should be our ultimate goal. At the ministers' meeting, then Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, Mr. Kajiyama, made a following request to the ASEAN energy ministers. It may be painful, but please make the carbon neutral declaration. If you do not declare carbon neutrality, you will not be able to obtain foreign financing for the technologies and projects which are necessary for meeting growing energy demand for economic growth. However, Japan will not force you to achieve carbon neutrality by a specific year, such as 2050. Each country should decide its own target year of carbon neutrality. Nevertheless, we do ask each country to draw its own roadmap in order to realize carbon neutral. Japan will financially support projects that are positioned in the roadmap, quote end. Minister Kajiyama's message was received very favorably by the ASEAN governments. This is because ASEAN governments were also wondering when to declare carbon neutral, what year to set as a target year, and whether the cost of carbon neutrality would dramatically rise electricity price or gasoline price. 80, this is the Asia Energy Transition Initiative, which was announced by Mr. Kajiyama at the ASEAN-Japan Energy Minister meeting, is composed of 5 pillars, which addresses these concerns of developing countries. First pillar is to support formulation of roadmap for carbon neutrality. The second is to promote the concept of Asia transition finance. Third, provide $10 billion financial support for transition projects related to renewable energy efficiency, hydrogen, ammonia, LNG, and CCUS. And then fourth pillar is to support technology development and demonstration using the results of Japan's Green Innovation Fund. Lastly, we're going to provide the human resource development, knowledge sharing, and rulemaking related to decarbonization technologies. For more details, I'd like to answer your questions if you want. So now we're going to move to what people have agreed at COP26. It was true that there was a significant breakthrough at COP26 last November. Indeed, 9 of 10 ASEAN countries declared carbon neutrality. This is an extremely significant step in relation with the realizing targets of the Paris Agreement. The next important step will be to find a solution to the difficult task of achieving both economic growth and carbon neutrality, as I mentioned earlier. Against this backdrop, it is not exaggeration to say that Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February had such an impact that it changed the global energy situation completely. Even before the Ukraine crisis, the price of oil, natural gas, and LNG had been soaring, but the Ukraine crisis had further accelerated the price hikes and increased volatility in the world. The Ukraine crisis has reaffirmed the importance of energy security to the world and has also confirmed that energy security is a prerequisite for decarbonization and climate actions. For example, several ASEAN countries have told us that they are forced to continue to use coal-fired power plants and oil-fired power plants because LNG is too expensive to purchase. This is a story that proves that energy security is a prerequisite for everything, including decarbonization. Since the Ukraine crisis, Asian countries are now required to achieve 3 indispensable values simultaneously, that is, economic growth, decarbonization, and energy security. As you may know that Japan is poor in domestic resources, importing 99.6% of its oil and 97.8% of its natural gas from abroad. Japan has an extremely fragile energy structure, with an energy sufficiency rate is 11%, which is the lowest among G7 countries and 35th among 36 OECD countries. Therefore, the simultaneous achievement of these 3 values has been the cornerstone of Japan's energy policy since the oil crisis of 1971. Japan's knowledge and experience of simultaneous achievement of these three values over the past 50 years should surely contribute to Asian countries, which have been facing the same problems. Finally, there's one thing I'd like to share with you this time. It is the conflict and gap between the developed and developing countries regarding the achievement of the goals of Paris Agreement, which we could call a new North and South conflict. As was the same as last year, the G20 Environment and Climate Meeting and G20 Energy Transition Meeting held 1 month ago revealed the division between developed and developing countries. Specifically, developed countries insisted to developing countries that they should aim for 1.5-degree target instead of 2-degree target, while developing countries insist that they demanded financial and technical assistance from developed countries. As was the same case last year, the two sides could not bridge the gap, and ultimately, the communique was not adopted. We believe that the key to resolving this division in the world is to create a flexible and realistic energy transition roadmap, which is tailored to each country's situation based on the premise of diversity in climate conditions, industrial structure, energy mix, and other factors, which should differ from country to country. This roadmap should not be created by developed countries, which impose their interest on developing countries. Rather than that, this roadmap should be created by listening carefully to the voices of developing countries and working together with developing countries in down-to-earth but sincere approach. This is extremely what 80's first pillar is all about. That is to support the formulation of roadmap toward carbon neutrality. I believe that this Japanese approach of engagement will definitely be useful for developed countries to support energy transitions, not only in Asia, but also in other developing countries. We hope to deliver this message to the next G7 meeting, which will be hosted by Japan next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Soda-san, for those wide-ranging remarks on the Japanese government policy and in a very practical approach to enabling a just energy transition while keeping in mind the energy security which has come to the fore following the various events that you described. I really like the 5 pillars of your of AITI's approach, and we believe that participants will benefit a lot from studying those and seeing how both their businesses and the countries they are in will actively develop actions around that. I'm now going to ask Ms. Leolie May to speak on the Singapore perspective, given her role in policy and strategy development for Singapore's gas and electricity markets and the energy transition in Singapore. May.
Hi, good evening. Can I just check that you can hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Thanks. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Soda-san, for the very, very broad overview, as well as the sharing on Japan's role and interest in working with our region in our decarbonisation journey. I'll share a little bit about, how we view the global energy markets today and actually its impact on Singapore and what we think, we can collaborate with Japan as well as our international partners on. So first, the global energy markets, I think we are facing significant stresses from a confluence of factors. So the world is undergoing an energy transition as part of our efforts to tackle the climate crisis. While this is well and good, and we do want to actually push on the development of renewable energy as much as possible, there is also some stresses in terms of the supply of fossil fuels because countries and companies they may actually be concerned about certain stranding risks, etc., and therefore underinvest in traditional energy infrastructure. Now, the second big factor is geopolitical tensions. I mean, of course, as we know, this has actually disrupted the global supply of natural gas. So these two factors coming together have actually caused significant supply risk as well as global energy price volatility. And what this has done is also created and actually worsened inflationary pressures arising from the economic recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. So this actually has an impact on elevated costs for businesses and consumers around the world. So, I mean, what does this actually mean for the global energy transition and Singapore's own energy transition? Okay, for the net zero transition, actually a key imperative is a decisive shift towards cleaner energy. Just because actually the energy industry does make up a large proportion of the world's emissions from production all the way to the use of energy. So what we need to do, we do need a strong growth in renewable energy deployment in the next few decades. And the problem is that while renewables growth has been quite spectacular, this has not been sufficient to meet growing energy demand. So according to the IEA, and I think we have been quoting from the IEA because they are the experts on this area, right? According to the IEA, the energy transition to achieve net zero is doable by 2050, but very difficult. So first, even when the world actually achieves net zero emissions, fossil fuels will actually still be with us. This is especially because the energy demand in Asia is expected to double by 2030 on the back of strong economic growth, rising affluence, and urbanization. So even if the overall global energy use falls in the net zero scenario in 2050, it will still increase in many developing countries. Fossil fuels will also continue to play an important role in the energy demands of Asia and Africa. And the IEA has actually projected that if the world reached net zero by 2050, we will still be using nearly half as much natural gas as today and a quarter as much oil. So as we know, I think it is kind of here to stay. So given this, it is actually quite important for us to take a pragmatic look at, the oil and gas industry. And I think this is something that Soda-san and myself, we agree on, taking a pragmatic look. And it is quite imperative for global energy producers and suppliers to come together and think about, how we can minimize the supply risk, which may actually force a reversal to more pollutive energy sources. Now, after saying all this, Singapore is really still firmly committed to doing our part in the global effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So last year, we launched the Singapore Green Plan, which sets out the roadmap towards sustainable development, a global economy, and net zero emissions. A key part of this plan is the energy transition. And we seek to actually decarbonize our power sector while ensuring energy security. Now, how does Singapore intend to do this? We have 4 switches, what we call switches, right? First, we are actually accelerating and maximizing domestic deployments of solar energy, but this is limited because Singapore is land constrained. Second, we are working with our regional partners to develop renewable energy resources and developing a regional power grid, which can serve to decarbonize both our power partners' power systems and ours. Third, we are developing new low-carbon solutions such as hydrogen, energy storage systems, carbon capture utilization and storage, and so on. And fourth, we will continue to rely on natural gas power generation by looking at how we can actually reduce the emissions from the supply chain. Now, despite the global energy crisis, Singapore will persist in our plans for the energy transition. We remain on track in our plans for energy imports. And, in our discussions with our neighbors and so on, actually, we recognize that actually these are win-win propositions because, it actually can benefit both our neighbors as well as ourselves. Good Pathfinder project, which was recently in the news, is the Lao PDR, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore Power Integration Project. And, we are actually flowing some electricity from Laos, and it's actually the first multilateral electricity trading project. So we are very excited about it, and we are hoping to actually expand this as well. And of course, the global energy crisis and the transition actually makes it even more salient for us to develop low carbon energy solutions that we can work with countries around the world on. So this include hydrogen and ammonia, and that actually allows the transport of clean energy around the world. So I'm very happy to say that we are working with our close partners like Japan as well as Australia to develop these options, and we actually do hope to deepen our energy relations through these collaborations. It stretches from R&D, right, to the creation and maintenance of supply chains, and also at the business-to-business level, right? So in fact, actually one of Singapore's generation companies, under Keppel Group, recently announced that it was working with Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries to develop Singapore's first hydrogen-ready power plant, right? So I think at various levels, we are very happy to collaborate with Japan as well as with other like-minded countries on all of this. And of course, within the broader Southeast Asian region, we are also hoping to, work with Japan on our decarbonization journey. I think what we can do is, we can work together and be a platform to develop and test bit new technologies, right? And when these are ready, actually, they can be deployed in the region. We are happy to work on transition financing, and we are happy to facilitate, joint ventures and partnerships amongst our companies to develop renewable energy projects in the region. So there's much opportunities for our collaboration, and I hope to deepen this discussion further. Thanks.
Thank you, Leme. And I really like the switches, which are similar to the 4 taps in the waters, and really good to see that the power flowing through the regional integration. I'm now going to ask Ms. Sumiko Takeuchi to make her remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me such a wonderful webinar. As 2 panelists have already mentioned, the values of energy policy are in great flux. We must have a high sense of danger regarding geopolitical risks, but on the other hand, it is important to consider regional cooperation. We are currently in the midst of a global energy crisis. Due to a lack of upstream investment, energy prices soared last autumn and are continuing to do so. Many countries, especially in Europe, have made climate change policies a top priority. In a more stable world situation, we might have been allowed to focus on main challenges of halting climate change, but we need to prepare for various risks in order to obtain stable and affordable energy. If the rush to shift to a carbon-neutral society makes it impossible to maintain a stable energy supply, energy security, and affordability, the public will lose support for climate change policies. It is putting the cart before the horse when a policy becomes unsustainable. Since the Paris Agreement, carbon neutrality has become a common goal of the world. There has been a global opinion that low carbon is meaningless, zero carbon is necessary. However, decarbonisation cannot be achieved all at once. A steady shift to a carbon-neutral society is needed. Excessive green idealism can hinder the transition, so we should recognize the importance of sure transition. If global warming targets are raised or the deadline for achieving the target is brought forward every year, the operating rate of the technology required during the transition period will be fluctuate, making return on investment uncertain. In this situation, it is no wonder investors are hesitant to fund transitional technologies. At last year's COP26, Prime Minister Kishida stated that Japan would use hydrogen and ammonia to produce low-carbon thermal power, and that we would utilize this technology together with people in Asia. The cost of hydrogen and ammonia is still high, and there are many challenges to overcome in order to expand their use in Asia, but they must be overcome in order to achieve carbon neutrality. In response to this situation, The Kishida administration established a GX Executive Committee, GX means Green Transformation, as a forum for discussing important policies of the Kishida administration that aim to transformation to entire economic and social system by moving away from fossil fuels and shifting to clean energy. We have just finished the second meeting, but I'd like to introduce some of the discussions so far. Due to Japan's small land area, it is not possible to produce sufficient decarbonized electricity from renewable energy source alone. The necessity of utilizing nuclear power was also discussed. I expect that the next meeting or the next meeting but one, as Prime Minister Kishida raised at COP26, there will be the discussion on how Japan can contribute to the low carbonization of Asia. Asia is a growing region. One of the reasons why Japan's energy transition is difficult is the possibility that energy demand will shrink due to the population decline. Private operators cannot invest in energy infrastructure that will take a long time to see returns in a shrinking market. Considering Asia as a whole, however, there is no doubt that society will continue to grow rapidly. I believe that we should make use of the energy-saving technology that Japan has cultivated so far, as well as advanced technologies such as hydrogen and ammonia. I'd like to talk from the perspective of how to obtain the necessary social support to achieve carbon neutrality. To create a new energy system, I feel that it is necessary to consider not only the value of CO2 reduction, but also the creation of added value. Energy is a means to an end, and CO2 is the result of human action. When deciding on the menu for dinner, for example, most people probably don't care about the garbage that comes out when choosing the menu. In order to move more of the world's people, we need to not only reduce CO2 emissions, but also provide technologies and services that improve comfort and convenience. If it becomes possible to reduce CO2 emissions, I think we can gain the support of many more people. I hope that not only energy supply technology, but also the technology and services that promote transformation on the demand side will be shared and developed throughout Asia. The value of CO2 reduction is a difficult concept to realize, so it is effective to put a price on carbon, but with the energy price soaring due to the Ukraine crisis, this would be difficult to implement. Again, we should aim for a society that not only reduces CO2 emissions, but also create added value through green transformation to achieve a high level of happiness among the people. I hope that Japan and Singapore will share a common understanding and become a driving force in promoting green transformation in Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Takeuchi-san. I think it was interesting to see your remarks on sure transition, which is not just about being just, but also looking at it from a commercial viability on multiple fronts. I also thought that the demand and supply side approach to what you said is very appropriate, and particularly how you might drive particularly incentives and nudges at multiple levels. I'm now going to ask Ms. Lelde Krumina to speak from her very unique position in this panel as a private sector participant who drives a business which needs to deliver commercial returns while enabling the energy transition to happen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure. Today, I would like to share our story, a company that has gone through several transformations from a regional oil refiner to becoming a global leader in renewable and circular solutions. If you look back into the history, Neste, the company that I'm representing today, is a Finnish company that is there since 70 plus years, originally to secure oil supply in Finland. And then more than 15 years ago, when Neste saw the environment changing, there was taken a bold decision to invest into production of renewable diesel, so turning 100% renewable raw materials like waste and residue, which could be, for example, used cooking oil, animal fat waste, and other residues, into the high quality drop-in fuel. And it was difficult times as the world was not ready for it, but we didn't give up because of our purpose, which is a strong one, to create a healthier planet for the next generations. And we are very pleased that today we've been placed on a Global 100 list as one of the most sustainable companies worldwide for over a decade. If you look today, Neste is the largest producer of renewable products like renewable diesel, renewable aviation fuel, as well as renewable feedstock for polymers and chemicals, which is global production over 3 million tons annually. And with our ongoing expansion projects, it will continue to increase the production capacity to 5.5 million tons by already the end of next year, and to 6.8 million tons by the end of 2026. And we are committed to supporting our customers to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20 million tons annually by 2030. And if you look on today, we have achieved basically halfway with our renewable and circular solutions. We helped our customers reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 11 million tons. And this amount equals the removal of 4.2 million passenger cars from the roads for a full year. Renewable fuels are already available in the market and are widely used in Europe and the US as a proven solution for all modes of transport like cars, trucks, trains, off-road vehicles, as well as planes and ships. And the most, let's say, important things is that you don't need to adapt engine, so without any modifications. And another, or let's say most importantly, they can substantially reduce transport emissions. And for example, like a switch to renewable fuels has immediate impact on the greenhouse gas emissions. The use of Neste renewable diesel can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 90% compared to the fossil diesel over the life cycle of the fuel. And as mentioned earlier, it is a drop-in fuel, so it's fully compatible with all diesel engines and distribution infrastructure due to its chemical composition, which is very close to the fossil diesel. It just doesn't contain aromatics and all the other bad substances. This makes it as a quick and effective tool that is ready for the use today, while the necessary technology and infrastructure for other renewable solutions are being developed and rolled out. And if you're talking about countries globally, so we see that there is increasing international focus, as the previous speakers been talking that, and addressing the climate emergency, and many countries around the globe, of course, including countries in Asia, have been setting up ambitious long-term decarbonisation targets, as well as interim ones for 2030. But I think now it is equally important to draw a map how it will be achieved and what actions will be taken already today, as 2030 is already in 8 years. And it is clear that a wide range of solutions will be needed, including hydrogen or ammonia, has been mentioned. Renewable fuels are needed alongside electricity and other alternatives to reach the targets that have been set out. And while the right mix of the solutions will be specific to the needs and environment of each country, some of these solutions are ready for acceleration in Asia-Pacific region already today. For example, in Japan, we are seeing the raising interest from the voluntary market, meaning individual companies and organizations are seeking to reduce their carbon footprint. And in order to support that, we have created a close collaboration with Itochu, the top 5 Sogososha in Japan, who is our partner, distributor of renewable diesel and renewable aviation fuel in Japan. For instance, today through them, we are supplying aviation fuel to ANA and renewable diesel, for example, to Cebu Bus, Family Mart, and others. And maybe just as a final note, I would like to emphasize that while renewable fuels may be one of the, let's say, plug and play solution, the real key to emission reductions in the transport sector is collaboration. So governments, businesses, and research institutes each have a role to play and must partner together to tackle the challenge. Thank you very much. That's it from my side for now.
Thank you, Ms. Lelde, for the really interesting remarks on your business strategy and how this is particularly going to drive the energy transition from private sector perspective. I would like to now look at the questions which are coming in. There are a few questions which have come in, so I would like to start with the first one, which is really something I'd like to address, particularly to our government members on the panel. In particular, how can fossil abundant countries adjust their economies to a carbon-free dominated world efficiently and without significant civil unrest? And I think here, I thought, Soda-san, your idea of a roadmap being a very important element of that would be very relevant. So maybe I'm going to ask you to start and then ask Leme and Takeuchi-san to share their views.
Okay, thank you, Satya, about the question from the audience. And I think, as you mentioned, that the roadmap towards carbon neutrality should be the one of the great solutions to this kind of the fossil abundant country. So, and then I'd like to deliver very important and also like a kind of the interesting situation in Asia, that currently there's a kind of global competition among the developed countries to support roadmap formation in developing countries, especially in Asia, as I mentioned earlier. And then many developed countries impose their own interests on their roadmap. However, as I mentioned, the roadmap supported by Japan is tailor-made for each country's actual situation, utilizing cost minimization model. This is based on the huge amount of the objective data with the collaboration with the ERIA, Economic Research Institute of ASEAN. And Japanese government places very great importance on dialogue with each government of ASEAN countries. And we hope that it will be utilized in a second opinion manner rather than imposed. The role of developed countries is to work with developing countries and should not impose their values. Country, which Japan's government has started to discuss with the collaboration of the formulating roadmap with Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And we're going to expand our discussion to the India, and the Philippines, and Brunei, and the other countries in the future. So I think one of the solutions to solve this gradual transition of these fossil abundant countries towards the more carbon-free countries, we have to formulate this kind of the tailor-made roadmap towards carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Leme, would you like to add to your response to this question?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, no, so I think what Soda-san has said is very helpful. I think it's about setting a clear direction, right, in terms of how we see the energy transition and actually how various parties, including governments as well as businesses and all that, can actually collaborate on this and work together on this so that actually it's a more orderly transition. Actually, I thought about sharing a little bit about, how the government could come in to support the private sector in actually, participating in all of these global energy transitions and, actually taking a step back and thinking about what the private sector can contribute first. Yeah. Okay. So, so in terms of private sector, I think how they can contribute to net zero efforts first really is through enterprise and innovation, right? In terms of developing clean energy and climate technologies. I think second, through private financing of projects, this will complement and actually go beyond public financing and actually really help to step up and scale up the deployments of clean energy and climate solutions. And third, really by voluntarily making the shift to greener options and hence providing actually more options and access to consumers. And how can actually governments actually help to create this supportive ecosystem? I think first, setting the direction, providing seed funding or grants, etc., right, for all of this new innovation, enterprise, etc. Right. Second is about putting in place the right regulatory frameworks. Incentives, rules, guidelines, norms, etc., right, to drive the development and deployment of clean energy and climate solutions. So what this can do really is about de-risking projects by safeguarding investments. And so one of the things that, I think we are very keen to work with our partners on from the government to government perspective is really developing safeguards and rules on clean energy trade. And this will actually become increasingly critical because we see new energy supply chains being developed with the shift towards low carbon energy sources. Now, the third lever that we thought could be used and put in place are really the right policy tools to incentivize a shift to greener options. So one of them is carbon pricing, right? And we do think that a meaningful price for carbon is the single most important measure to actually help decarbonize the economy. And this can actually send quite a good signal across, the global economy. And as part of this, I mean, you have things like carbon trading, you have carbon credits and so on, which actually on the G2G front we can work with to actually facilitate private investments. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Soda-san and Lei-Mei. I want to move a bit towards an interesting question here asked about from Swati Manloi on the question of the fact that climate transition will take time and there's going to be significant uncertainty with extreme weather, heat waves, crop failures, and these will continue to grow. How does the panel look at this from a perspective of increasing the emphasis on climate adaptation, and what will this mean in the region? So I'm going to ask Takeuchi-san maybe to comment on that, given that you sit in a very unique position in your role.
Yeah, thank you very much for the important question. Yeah, adaptation is the most becomes more urgent and more important what matters to tackling with the climate change. So in the negotiation of the UNFCCC COP conference, the adaptation becomes the key issues in that negotiation. And in this context, Asia is the region is also the key to tackle with this problem. Asian country has some resembles in the climate matters and landscape. So yeah, we can incorporate with tackling with this adaptation issues also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm now like to ask Ms. Romina a little bit more about this question of low carbon solutions and how we can scale them up, as well as the fact that if countries become more and more electric vehicle focused, how do you avoid renewable diesel becoming irrelevant? Not quite different from the point which Leme was earlier making, that even in a very decarbonized or net zero world, there will be a lot of fuel being used, both oil and gas, to create energy, right? To create power. But that may not quite be the same with, transport, for example. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe thanks a lot for the questions. Maybe I could start with the first one, how to scale up low carbon solutions availability. And as mentioned earlier, the real key to emission reduction in the, let's say, in a transport sector is a collaboration. So the private and public sector each have a role to play, and must partner up together to tackle the challenge. And obviously the governments are critical to creating enabling conditions for the businesses to fight this climate change. And in line with the national commitments, for example, implementation of policies and the regulations that incentivize or mandate more sustainable solutions. And I think that aligns the expectations of how businesses operate. And it also encourages, let's say, the companies, entrepreneurs or organizations like research institutes to develop sustainable new solutions, products and markets. And yeah, and in parallel, companies have the responsibility and opportunity to stay competitive by transforming their business. For example, like I've been just sharing our story, and to become more sustainable. The private sector is playing, and I think is expected to play an increasing role as a let's say change maker, and this being also recognized by governments and the non-profit sector alike, leading a range of collaborations between the public and private sectors. And the other question of, let's say, would renewable diesel be still important if there would be more, let's say, EVs on the streets in the countries, other countries, and so. And I would say yes. I think that the challenge that is in front of us is huge, that we will surely need multiple different solutions. Today, the world is consuming about, let's say, 900 million tons of diesel on an annual basis. And to replace that, it will require a number of different solutions. And I see renewable diesel has a very important role there. But it is also evident that, let's say, as mentioned, electrification, especially when it comes to the private sector cars, is very important. And we will also see, let's say, hydrogen playing an important role, as probably other solutions as well. So we are seeing that those different solutions are actually complementing each other, as different solutions will serve different segments of the transport sector.
Thank you, Ms. Krumina. There is a question on the G2G angle in the chat from Abby Wong about uncertainties about renewable energy import between Singapore and neighboring countries. Can you share your views on this and how it will affect the long-term plan to import 4 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2035?
Sorry, the question is for me. Yes. Is the question for me or?
Yes, that's for you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, wait. I can't quite find that question.
Oh yeah, you can see answer.
Abby Wong, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Ongoing G2G discussions on views and how it will affect EMA's plans. Well, I think yes, I think there are some uncertainties in view of certain announcements, etc. By various countries. But actually, to be honest, I think it's actually going on quite well in terms of our discussions with various countries. I think we have been speaking to various countries in the region. We are looking at actually diversifying our sources as well. So it's not just the one or two countries which, may not be so keen on exporting renewable energy in the near term. So I would say that, we are on track. I think we are actually continuing to keep warm, right, on all of these potential sources. In fact, actually, there is a lot of interest from the private sector, to actually import electricity into Singapore. And I think, some of these discussions are still ongoing. And actually, recently, EMA did launch and combine the RFPs, the request for proposals for large-scale electricity imports, and it is going on quite well. And we have received quite a lot of interest. Yeah. So yeah. I think we are on track. I don't think it is too much of an issue. But in any case, there are actually many other options as well in terms of low carbon hydrogen and all that we are developing as alternative options as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So optimism there, you can see. Great to hear that. I'd like now to turn to the discussion really on coal, because in particular, I think there's a lot of headlines on this issue, and I'm going to ask Soda-san, really, the G7 summit really declared in June that public financing for international fossil fuel projects that have not taken emission reduction measures will be halted by the end of 2022. Does this contradict the Japanese government's support for energy transition in Asia? Will private finance follow suit? So maybe you want to share your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Satya-san, about the questions. And then if we can read the G7 leaders' communique very carefully, we can find an exception to the suspension of the public finance. That is, except in limited circumstances clearly defined by each country, consistent with the 1.5-degree warming limit and the goal of the Paris Agreement. Specifically, we can still make financial support on projects which are based on the roadmap consistent with the Paris Agreement. As to the discussions on private finance, METI, we have been following discussions of the Asia Transition Financial Study Group, which was established last September. And then that was led by the Japanese private banks and also Asian private banks and also European and US banks. And the discussions among these private financial institutes are not only focused on decarbonization, but also include the possibility to support as long as the projects are in the way of decarbonization in the target countries. Private financial institutes address the importance of the carbon neutral roadmap, which guarantees that the project will contribute to the decarbonization process of the country. In conclusion, I'd like to share two important things with as many people as possible. First one, prepare realistic roadmap towards carbon neutrality would encourage private investment and also financing. Second, both public finance and private finance have almost same transition finance policy. That is, they can finance projects which are based on the country's roadmap towards carbon neutrality. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Soda-san. My connection is a bit unstable, so if you can't hear me well, please let me know. I'm going to ask for May that Ukraine conflict has, and of course the pressure on inflation and other matters have led countries to go back to cheap sources of which is grants, and of course prior to this year there was a lot of, and of course, phase down or phase out coal. How should we view this development from your perspective?
Sorry, Satya, is this question for me? Or is this for someone else?
It's for you, Lim.
Okay, great. Okay, no, so well, from our perspective, I think it's actually kind of linked to my earlier point about ensuring that there is sufficient investments as well as financing into fossil fuels that are needed for energy transition. So in particular, I think natural gas, right? So let me go back a little bit. I think it's quite notable that some countries have had to step up the use of coal-fired power plants, or restart the use of coal because of pressing needs. But what this actually has spotlighted, in a sense, is that we do need a pragmatic transition, right, for our global energy transition, and we can't just imagine that we can actually just deploy renewable energy 100% all around, because it doesn't work like that. There are various challenges to doing so. And, energy is just such an essential commodity for many countries, right? And, all of these energy supply disruptions actually have spillover effects on, not just prices, but I mean, overall the community as well as the economy. And it'll be very difficult, I think, for various countries to bear all of these stresses. So, with the importance, I think, of natural gas as a transition fuel, for example, especially for countries that are shifting away from coal, I think it's quite necessary that, we work together as governments, as businesses and so on, to set clear directions about what is the role of natural gas, both as a transition fuel as well as for the longer term energy mix, as well as think about whether or not there needs to be continued investments into this natural gas production and supply chain. And I think besides that, I mean, of course, it's an acceleration of investments into renewable energy developments, as well as energy storage systems and so on as well. I think that is definitely essential as well, working hand in hand with what we are thinking about for natural gas. And this will be quite critical for us to actually transition while ensuring energy security for all. Thanks.
Thank you, Leme. There's another question which has come up from the audience. What Asian countries such as China and Japan can exercising global leadership in climate change mitigation and adaptation as the US stumbles on its own climate change and goals? I'm going to ask Takeuchi-san maybe to take a stab at that, and others to contribute if you wish.
Thank you very much for good questions. But first of all, the Biden administration in the US passed a bill to reduce inflation. If this bill works, I believe that they will succeed in reducing CO2 emissions more than they have so far, although they will not reach their Paris Agreement goals. And the path towards carbon neutrality is diverse, I think, and depending on the country's economic situation and renewable energy potential and blah, blah, blah. So what kind of technology will be used will also vary. The most important thing is, as Soda-san mentioned, to provide a roadmap that gives foresight to the industrial or financial sector, but it is also important to be flexible in modifying the roadmap. So situation, just like Ukraine crisis, the situation surrounding the energy policy is very fluctuate. So for the flexible modifying the roadmap is very important. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to ask a question both here around the areas of possible cooperation between Japan and Singapore is energy security. So if you can talk briefly about that, maybe and Leme after that.
Yes, and this is a question to who?
Yes, to you first, and then
okay.
to Leme.
Yeah, sorry for that. So yes, I think the Singapore is similar to Japan in the perspective of the heavy dependence in LNG or natural gas from overseas. And in this perspective, we would like to consider the enhancing collaboration on energy crisis. In addition to that, from the perspective of preventing future crises, we would like to cooperate with Singapore because Singapore is the central role in finance area in Asia and regarding the investment of the energy sector, including from the upstream to downstream, such as the gas utilization. And then we, Japan, has the accumulated knowledge and experience in public finance. And then we would like to share this kind of best practice with Singapore. Furthermore, in order to achieve realistic energy transition in Asia, we would like to work together with Singapore to use our knowledge and experience, especially for LNG, and then also use this kind of experience and knowledge for developing hydrogen and ammonia supply chain in Asia in the future. And also, I believe that Singapore has deep knowledge in MRV, a measure, report, and verification of greenhouse gas, including methane. We can expect cooperation in the clean utilization of LNG as a transition energy in Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lemi, can you share your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I agree with all the areas that Soda-san has mentioned. I think maybe I'll just add on a little bit. So for natural gas, I think for us, we can actually share information and trends on natural gas consumption in our countries. We can have policy exchanges on how we can regulate our gas sectors to enhance energy security. And I think some of this can also be communicated to our industry, to our companies and so on, to guide them. I think second, on hydrogen and ammonia, we are both both Singapore and Japan, we are quite heavily invested in research and development. And I do think that, we are, in a sense, quite advanced on that. So I think what we can do is we can collaborate to develop technologies, right, for production, storage, transport, conversion, and the use of hydrogen in our power sector, industry, and maritime. We can work together to develop new supply chains, right, and explore new sources. And I think, not just at the G2G level, but also at the business to business level. Yeah, and I think other than actually working just bilaterally, we can actually work, with our region as well as, our like-minded partners. So, for example, Australia and so on. And I think it's not just G2G, but we welcome, our companies and so on to actually participate in this as well. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Soda-san and Lemi. There is a question about the difference in economic development in various ASEAN countries. I'm going to actually ask Krumina to come and answer this, particularly given your wide footprint, different players in different countries. Can you share your thoughts on where are you seeing this take-up of your products happening much better, and what solutions are you seeing at the ASEAN level, and how are reaching the supply chain? So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. In terms of the countries, maybe let's a bit step back about where do we see currently. Currently, obviously, we are more, let's say, our export markets are Europe and the US, even though that we also have a, let's say, production site in Singapore. But recently, let's say, we see that step by step, there is demand or awareness also increasing in Asia Pacific countries, as mentioned, particularly in Japan, in Australia, New Zealand, in Singapore as well. And currently, it's let's say, as mentioned, it's more like coming like from the individual companies or organizations who are, let's say, seeking their carbon reductions. But another thing is, of course, that let's say, to accelerate the uptake of biofuels or renewable, let's say, energy, and so there's needed also support from the government, like that is also in Europe and the US. And in terms of the other solutions, as mentioned, I think all of them will be needed for sure. All of the mentioned ones, like including ammonia, hydrogen, bio-LNG, renewable fuels, electrification, because there is no one single bullet that could solve, let's say, the climate challenge.
Thank you. I know I'm mindful that we have just 2 minutes to end, and I'm going to try and bring this to a close now. We've had a fascinating discussion on a very wide range of topics, thanks to the four of you with your wealth of knowledge and experience and different perspectives. I thought that we're seeing a considerable amount of wisdom and energy being put in by Japan at the government level to build out through the ATI, the energy transition with a very just approach, while recognizing the coming to the fore of energy security as a key driver now of economic and national policy. We're also seeing collaboration and cooperation between Japan and Singapore as kind of taking a lot of this to the next level. And I'm really encouraged by the remarks that you have made in this regard as a pathfinder and a beacon for the rest of ASEAN. And finally, we are seeing the private sector stepping up and working closely. And the message we got from the government representatives on the call was the fact that you are both excited to see private sector joining hands with the public sector to together work on the roadmaps as well as the individual solutions and innovations with regard to the transition. So I'm really encouraged by what we're hearing. And so while there's a lot of naysayers, we believe that by concerted action, cooperation, we can get there by 2050 in a productive and effective way. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm going to pass back to Chu Leng for his last words.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Satya. And of course, a great thank you to our four distinguished guests and panelists today. I echo Satya's sentiment that today's session was very insightful and very fruitful. And I believe that all of us have benefited in terms of the discussion and the points brought up. So thanks everyone for taking the time. We will be streaming, or we will be uploading a video record of this webinar on our website YouTube channel after this, and we will send out the details for that after that. So you may view this video again if there's a need to.